5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into a colloquy with Mr. Skeen, if I might. I had planned to offer an amendment to increase funding for the Rural Community Advancement Program by $10 million in order to fund a national pilot program to promote agritourism. The purpose of this program is to provide another means of income for America's struggling family farmers. I think the plight of the family farmer in America is well documented, and I don't need to get into it now. But as I've said before, I am impressed with the work done in New Mexico with the Rural Economic Development through Tourism program. And I know Mr. Skeen has been very active in that program. I think it would be very useful to expand this general concept into a national program. I think it's working well in New Mexico, and I think it could work well throughout rural America. However, I understand that the funding authority for the Agricultural Appropriation Subcommittee has decreased significantly for fiscal year 1999, and I would therefore like to get a commitment from the gentleman from New Mexico to work with me in the future to fund a pilot national agritourism program for fiscal year 2000.
Well, I want to tell the gentleman that he's picked on a good program because it has been very, very good in its operation in New Mexico, and I hope that we could extend that, and I will pledge to you that I'll work with you to help develop this program into a nationally recognized.
Well, that's really good. I think farmers, dairy farmers and others need additional sources of income, and agritourism has proved successfully in New Mexico and other states. I look forward to working with you to make it a national concept.
The gentleman should consider it done.
Thank you very much.
As far as promise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skeen. I yield back the balance of my time.
The clerk will read.
Page 51, line 17, for administrative expenses, $1,850,000. Commodity Credit Corporation Export Loans Program account, $3,820,000. Export Credit, $5,500,000,000. Emerging Markets Export Credit, $200 million in credit guarantees. Title VI, related agencies, and Food and Drug Administration.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New Mexico.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill through page 67, line 15 be considered as read, printed in the record, and open to amendment at any point.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Are there amendments to the portion just opened? If not, the clerk will read.
Page 67, line 16, section 736. In issuing the final rule to implement the amendments to federal milk marketing orders, none of the funds may be used to issue the rule other than during the period of February 1 through April 4, 1999.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment numbered 7, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Obey of Wisconsin.
The gentleman from Wisconsin has 5 minutes on his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this will take a little time because I need to go back into some history to explain what's happening here today. In 1938, the Congress passed legislation which established a series of milk marketing orders, which in essence had the government setting prices for fluid milk based on where that milk was manufactured in the country. That made sense in 1938 when we didn't have refrigeration, we didn't have quality highways. It does not make sense today. It simply encourages overproduction, and it costs the taxpayer, and it hurts the consumers. And it hurts a lot of farmers in a number of regions around the country. In 1985 Farm Bill, Congressman Coelho was instrumental in making a legislative change to that provision in law. First time that the Congress had interfered. Up until that time, whatever differentials were provided for price one for class 1 pricing were provided by administrative decision on a neutral basis. But that 1985 law added to the differential, and it raised the cost of milk products in a number of sections around the country. As a result, today a farmer in Florida is required by law to receive $3 more per 100 pounds of milk than a farmer from my neck of the country is. A farmer from New York for fluid milk is required by law to be paid $2 more 100 on average than farmers in my section of the country. Now, we tried to change that in the Farm Bill that passed 2 years ago, and our efforts culminated in the amendment being offered that was offered at that time by Mr. Gunderson, who was who was at that time the Republican chair of the Dairy Subcommittee, and he tried to offer an amendment which would, in a wholesale way, reform that system. He was rebuffed, and he was told by the leadership of the House, no, there will not be any ability to offer an amendment to change this on the House floor. We're going to block you in the Rules Committee. The only remedy that you will have is administrative. Now, proceeding under authority in the Farm Bill to review the situation, Secretary Glickman has reviewed the 7 options that he had before him for reforming this monstrosity, and he has proposed 2 for consideration by farmers. One is called Option 1A, the other is called Option 1B, and the agency prefers 1B, which is a tiny, modest reform of the existing system. The status quo is represented by Option 1A. Now what is happening is that the very people who told us that we could not have a legislative remedy are now saying you can't have an administrative remedy either. What they are saying is they are in essence delaying the ability of the Secretary to produce a reformed a recommendation. And what that means is the Congress is saying, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Glickman, don't bother to even think about changing the milk marketing order system because we will override you legislatively. That's why they have this delay in allowing the Secretary to propose his amendment. I think that's illegitimate, and that's why I have a simple motion to strike that provision of the bill. I should have been allowed, under the normal rules of the House, I should have been allowed to simply strike this section on a point of order, because this section of the bill is clearly legislating on an appropriation bill. It is illegal under the rules of the House. It is not under the jurisdiction of the Appropriations Committee, and I should have been allowed to strike that. I was not allowed to do so because that illegitimate section was protected by the rule. So now this is the only opportunity we have to have any discussion whatsoever of this proposal. There is one other problem associated with what is in the bill. It also, by indirection, extends what is known as the Northeastern Dairy Compact. I don't blame representatives from any region of the country for trying to get a better deal for their farmers. But it should not come at the expense of farmers in other sections of the country, and it should not come at the expense of consumers. What this provision in the bill provides is that it also allows for another 6-month extension of the Northeast Dairy Compact. That will continue to raise prices for consumers in that region. It will continue to fence out from that region all dairy products produced in any other section of the country. And I find it ironic that persons in the, I ask unanimous consent to proceed for 2 additional minutes.
Is there objection? The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the House for their indulgence. I find it ironic that some of the same people in this House who have lectured us on the need to open trade barriers internationally are now saying, oh, but we should proceed to erect trade barriers within the continental United States. That's exactly what the continuation of the Northeast Dairy Compact would do. So this amendment is very simple. It simply strikes the illegitimate provision, after I've completed my sentence. It simply strikes the provision in the bill which extends the existing milk marketing order system and prevents the Secretary from offering reforms to it until he's waited another 6 months. And it would also follow the original intent of the Northeast Dairy Compact and end that compact at the same time. If you believe in bringing dairy into a free market system, rather than having government dictate the price that farmers are paid, you will vote for this amendment. It will be fair to consumers. It will be much fairer to the farmers in many sections of the country than the existing situation is. It will certainly be fairer to my farmers. And I think if anyone votes against this amendment and claims with a straight face to be a free marketer, he's been looking at a different dictionary than I have, and I'd be happy to.
I am delighted to see my friend from Wisconsin, my good friend, suddenly defending the free market theory when on so many issues we have stood together and said that it is absolutely appropriate to protect working people, to protect family farmers against the changes in the free market.
Reclaiming my time, I have no objection protecting people from the unfair aspects of the free market, provided that you protect everybody. But the way this works is you're protecting your farmers at the expense of farmers in every other section of the country, and I don't regard that as a legitimate way to proceed.
Will the gentleman from Wisconsin yield?
Sure.
Time of the gentleman from Wisconsin has expired.
My remarks.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
No. We have an amendment pending.
Oh, is yours pending? I'm sorry.
The gentleman from New York seek recognition. Does the gentleman seek to strike the last word?
I seek to strike the last word.
On the amendment offered by Mr. Obey.
In opposition to the Obey amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Come on, Tim. Speaker, let me just rise in the strongest possible opposition to the motion to strike this extremely important provision in this bill. This provision is vital to the long-term livelihood of the dairy farmers throughout this entire country. I'm about to show you a chart that shows dairy farmers all across America. Doesn't matter whether you're from the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, anywhere except in Wisconsin, they would lose, and they would lose badly, and our farmers would be out of business. There would not be a farm left in Massachusetts, in New York, in New England, anywhere in New England, in Vermont, if this legislation were to be defeated here today. Let me take a moment to correctly characterize the dairy provisions of the 1996 Farm Bill, as I was the author of those provisions just over 2 years ago, along with my good friend sitting over here from Louisiana. He's chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Bob Livingston. And also my good friend, Mr. Skeen from New Mexico, the chairman of the subcommittee. The 1996 Farm Bill calls for reform in dairy. Government purchases of products are phased out. Eliminating the federal budget outlays to dairy, marketing orders are consolidated, and pricing adjustments are to be made. However, it was made explicitly clear in the deliberations over the 1996 Farm Bill that the basic pricing structure of the federal dairy program that is so vitally important to the dairymen and women across this nation would be maintained without question. That's what the legislation says. Someone argued that the federal dairy program divides our nation's dairy farmers into regions of haves and have-nots. The facts simply do not support that claim, Mr. Speaker. The Class 1 differentials that are such a popular target of the sponsors of this amendment in reality do not translate to higher producing pay prices. I'm just going to revise and extend my remarks for the rest of this prepared statement. But I just want to show you something, ladies and gentlemen. In upstate New York, in the Hudson Valley, we have farmers that have farmed that land for generations. And these people have probably a net income between the husband, the wife, and one child. In other words, gross income of about $31,000 if they're lucky, and most of them are less than that. How do they get that? You know, if they're lucky under the present milk marketing order system, which is a price support not paid for by the government, not one nickel paid for by the government, but in other words, the farmer might make $8,000. With all that work that goes into this over the course of a year. In order to maintain the farm and to maintain even a standard of living, the wife has to go out and she has to work for a catheter firm where she might make $12,000 or $13,000. And the one son who gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning when it's 30 below zero up there, the one son gets up, helps to milk the cows, then he goes to work in some other area, and in total they have an income of $31,000, and they barely are are able to pay the taxes and keep that farm going. That's why we are losing farms by the hundreds, because people from New York City with all their money come up, and then when they see the farmer no longer could make it, his son decides not to be the 16th generation, in other words, to work on that farm, and they no longer can make it. Then somebody comes up there, they buy this farm, they renovate this farmhouse, and these wealthy people live happily ever after, but the farm is gone. And they're gone by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Milk price supports, regardless of what the gentleman is going to say, simply guarantees that in every part of the country, you're going to lose money if we don't maintain those milk price supports. Take a look at this chart. Every single state in the union, except Wisconsin, loses money. Wisconsin makes money.
No.
Now, let me just clarify for the last time what happened in 1996. I had just gotten out of a hospital. 30 days where I had cancer, came on this floor and got into an argument with my good friend Pat Kennedy, which I probably shouldn't have been here, over guns. And the next day we took up this bill. And the explicit bill said that we will maintain milk marketing orders. We will let the commissioner, the Secretary of Agriculture, shrink those orders from 34 or 35 down to a workable 13 or 14. That was the order we gave. Now, we have over 238 members of this Congress coming from New York City, from the rural areas like my good friend from New Vermont over here, who have signed this letter to Mr. Glickman saying you have to live up to the law. The law says we will maintain milk marketing orders. The gentleman from Wisconsin, this gentleman from Wisconsin, they want to abolish it. They want to abolish it because they know their farmers will make more money if it's abolished, but all the rest of us will lose and lose badly.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Consent that the gentleman be allowed to continue for 2 minutes.
Is there objection?
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
I'd be glad to yield to someone I respect greatly, Mr. Obey of Wisconsin.
Let me simply ask the gentleman, outside of the fact that your state has 31 members in this House and our state has 9, is there any other reason why your farmers should be required by law to receive $2 for every 100 pounds of fluid milk, $2 more for every 100 pounds of milk than my farmers are allowed to receive under the law? Doesn't the gentleman believe that the market should determine what the price is rather than which state has the most votes on the floor of the House?
And that's exactly why we need the Northeastern Compact. It's why they need a Southeastern Compact, because what it does, it guarantees that 8 million people in New York City and another 10 million upstate are going to get fresh milk, not coming from Wisconsin or someplace else, produced in the Hudson Valley of New York State. Now, let's clear it one more time. You know, there is an overproduction of milk. In the Northeast, do you know how much we overproduce? I mean, all these farmers that we're talking about, 2%. 2%.
Would the
now,
gentleman
you know
yield
where the real overproduction comes? It comes from your area, Mr. Obey. You know it. The whole country knows it. And you want to make even more money for your farmers. And I don't begrudge you that. But don't put ours out of business. That's what you're doing.
Would the gentleman yield on that point?
I'd always yield to my friend if I have time.
Let me simply ask, would the gentleman, does the gentleman really believe that we should be establishing internal trade barriers to milk products in this country while we're being told that we should abandon trade barriers internationally?
Did the gentleman ever live or work on a dairy farm? I grew up on a dairy farm in Okeechobee, Florida. Let me tell you something. Fresh milk means everything. And we can't abolish small dairy farms from across the country and depend on 5,000 herd of cattle owned by people that don't even belong in the dairy business. These international conglomerates, we don't want to depend on them, Dave. We want small dairy farmers in America.
Yield, the average farm in my district is 50 cows. 50 cows, that's hardly a giant. The gentleman makes the best possible argument for the worst case that you have on the merits.
I plead with the gentleman to join us. Let me yield to my good friend from Massachusetts. Oh, he's going to get his own time. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the...
The chair would advise the gentleman from Massachusetts. The gentleman from Wisconsin has been on his feet seeking recognition and may be recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in support of the Dean of the Wisconsin delegation, Mr. Obie and his amendment.
The gentleman will suspend. I would advise the gentleman that the gentleman from Wisconsin has had the time for several minutes, and so we're going to recognize now the gentleman from Wisconsin. Just to clarify, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Petri, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fact of the matter is that the federal milk marketing order system has been gradually strangling the dairy producers of Wisconsin. There's no doubt about it. Before the federal government got into this business, Wisconsin was known as America's dairy land. We were by far #1 in dairy production. Since the federal government got into this in the Depression, and then it's been extended, what we've seen is a pattern where gradually the producers of Wisconsin have been squeezed out of business. I would yield to no one in the country in their concern about dairy producers, but I would question them being concerned about dairy producers just because they happen to be next door rather than across the United States. And the fact of the matter is the effect of the Northeast Compact and of the milk marketing order system has been to put hardworking dairy farmers out of business net in the United States. The reason really is that the impact is disproportionate on Wisconsin is due to the different structure of our dairy industry historically from many other areas of the country. Most of the areas of the country were historically fluid milk producing areas of the country for urban consumers. In Wisconsin, 90% of our milk on average historically has been gone into value-added processed products, cheese, butter, and the like, and then shipped all across the United States. Over years, as people learned how to manipulate the milk marketing order system, what's happened is that they have used the price supports to help them produce fluid milk for their local consumers. They've used that to subsidize excess production and then manufactured that excess production into butter and cheese and so on, driving Wisconsin producers out of business. The fact of the matter is we are no longer America's dairy land in Wisconsin. We are #2 both in milk production and now for the first time in several generations in the number of cows to California. That's because not that Wisconsin farmers don't work hard, not that they're relatively inefficient, but because of the discrimination against the upper Midwest that's inherent in the federal government milk marketing program. The time has come to end that program and not keep it alive, and I'd certainly yield to my dean, Mr. Obie.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me simply observe that all through the debate last year we were told you guys aren't going to get the opportunity to offer an amendment on this floor because we're going to prevent you from doing that by a special rule in the Rules Committee. So you aren't going to get a legislative remedy. You're going to have to rely on the USDA to come up with an objective reevaluation through their analysis. Now that USDA has done so and the Secretary of Agriculture has indicated clearly that this system needs some reform, even though the reform he's proposed is the most minimal of the options offered outside of the status quo, we're now being told, no, sorry guys, don't bother, Mr. Secretary, don't bother, because if you try to adjust it, we're going to hammer you down legislatively. That's what the provision is about in the bill. We're offering this amendment so that we finally get an opportunity to deal with this issue the way we should have been allowed to get an opportunity when the bill was originally before us. I thank the gentleman for the time.
Will my friend yield?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Over here, Tim.
Yes,
in the well.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
I'd be happy to yield.
As my friend from Wisconsin knows very well, this is June Dairy Month back in Wisconsin. We've got 72 dairy breakfasts going on. 24,000 family farms are celebrating June Dairy Month right now. Since 1980 alone, because of this antiquated Depression-era federal milk marketing order system, we suffered half of the family farms that have gone out of business in the last 18 years. Roughly 5 or 6 family farms a day are going out of business because of this price differential that's pitting region against region. This is a golden opportunity for this Congress to finally come together, bring the competing regions together, finally hammer out one coherent national dairy policy that will get rid of these trade barriers that are now existing from region to region, and start positioning our dairy producers for the 21st century so we can compete internationally. Rather than subsidizing inefficient dairy operations at home, we should be looking beyond our borders and how we can gain access to these opening markets overseas. We're not going to do that as long as we perpetuate this discriminatory form of dairy policy that works by and large to the disadvantage of farmers up in Wisconsin. I've got 9,000 of those family farms in my district alone, and Eau Claire, the city, has been the epicenter of this discriminatory policy. That's what has to change. And I thank the gentleman for yielding.
The gentleman from Massachusetts rise.
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin. Indeed, I feel a little bit like an exhibit in an SAT question. What doesn't belong in this sequence? Because I find myself in among all the Wisconsinites, and I am not motivated similarly to them. I bid them all a happy June Dairy Month. I was previously unaware of its existence, and I probably will not celebrate it other than today. I am speaking for the consumers in favor of the amendment. Let me address the free market question. I have generally believed that we should, when we are dealing with production, rely on the powerful pro-production, pro-efficiency mechanism of the free market. I differ with some of my colleagues here in believing that the government then has some responsibility to provide safety nets. So I want to see these dairy farmers who are not doing well get the benefit of health care. I differ from some of my colleagues maybe in that. I do think, however, you make a distinction. The free market is the best way to govern production. Then the government intervenes to deal with people who may not be doing well. What I am struck by are the number of my colleagues who are ordinarily supporters of the free market who trash it in this regard. My friend from New York, who I had always thought of as a great conservative, says that there are people who don't belong in the dairy business. Apparently we have a new function now. We in the Congress will decide who belongs in the dairy business and who doesn't belong in the dairy business. I don't think we belong in the business of deciding who belongs in the dairy business. And therefore, we ought to get to this amendment. I'll yield to the gentleman from New York.
Yield?
Yes.
No, I didn't mean that at all. What I meant was, Barney, you know, we went through an S&L crisis, you know, a number of years ago when we raised the...
I only have 5 minutes.
I know, I'll get you some more time, okay? But, you know, what happened was, you know, when we changed the guaranteed deposits, you know, everybody got into the banking business. You and me decided we were going to be bankers, and we jumped in because it was all going to be federally guaranteed. Now, you've got the same kind of people jumping into the dairy business.
Well, let me say, okay, I apologize for responding to what the gentleman said rather than what he meant, but my psychic powers are not as strong today as they've been. I differ with the analogy. In the S&L business, we did try very hard to put the S&L owners out of business. Those who were, in fact, culpable, we protected the depositors, but not the owners. But this is the issue. And I have all these free market people on the other side. I mean, maybe I'm a sloppy reader. I thought I was familiar generally with the works of Milton Friedman, of Friedrich von Hayek and Ludwig von Mises and Daffy von Duck and whoever else you are citing. I must have missed the footnote that said none of this applies to farming. Somehow, apparently, in this whole body of intellectual activity that defends the free market, there's an exception for farming. What are we told? There's overproduction, my friend from New York says. Too many people are producing. There are people who can barely make it. And what's the solution? Let's have the government step in and protect that overproduction. Let's have government rules that guarantee that people can continue to overproduce. It is the role of the market to deal with this in a fair way. If there are people who will then suffer, I'm for health care for them. I'm for better education programs for their children. I'm for trying to protect them. What this does is artificially keep prices high in parts of the country so that poor consumers have to pay higher milk prices. Let's also understand that there is no magical source of money here. If you're going to pay some farmers more money than they would otherwise get because of government rules, and it's not coming from the taxpayer, it must be coming from the consumers. And indeed, I am, I guess, in the minority in my region in opposing the dairy compact, because that is another example of mercantilism, which, to protect a small number of people who apparently would not make it in a free market system, we require others to subsidize them. I'll yield again to the gentleman from New York.
You know, I just don't quite understand this, because I've got some strange allies, too. The Liberal Party in the state of New York. We have a Republican, a Democrat, a Liberal, a Conservative Party. The Liberal Party of the state of New York, which are consumer-oriented, support my position.
Let me say, I would say to the gentleman two things.
Because it gives them fresh, perishable milk.
Let me say two things to the gentleman. First of all, I am somewhat familiar with the political history of New York. And there is less justification for the continued existence of that Liberal Party, which is a vestige, as you know, than there is for some of these dairy farms that can't make it on their own. The Liberal Party in New York is a patronage farm, and you want to subsidize them. But beyond that, what the gentleman is saying is the consumer should be willing to subsidize this because the consumer will get fresh milk. I think I'll let the consumer make that decision. I do not think the United States House of Representatives has to say to the consumer, look, we're going to make this choice for you. We will set rules that make you pay higher because you'll be getting fresh milk. Consumers are capable of making, in a minute, consumers are capable of making that decision. If, in fact, people aren't willing to pay enough of a premium to buy the extra milk, then we won't have it.
Time of the gentleman
I would ask for 2 additional minutes.
Is there objection? The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from New York for helping me get the 2 additional minutes, and I will yield first to the gentleman from Vermont.
You yield to me first.
No,
well, the gentleman from Vermont first, because I haven't yielded to him yet at all. You're on the same side. It's equity. You're both against the free market. One socialist.
Barney and I stand together.
We're talking about socialist economics, one versus the other. That's okay. I'll yield to the gentleman from Vermont.
Now, what we are talking about is 6 states, among other things, and the legislatures and the governors of 6 states and the people of 6 states coming together and saying, yes, it is terribly important that we save family farmers today and in the future. In terms of consumers, Mr. Frank, let me suggest this, that if family farmers in New England and around this country go out of business, and if dairy is controlled by a handful of multinational agribusiness corporations, if you think the consumers are going to get a good deal, you're wrong.
Well,
Second of all,
excuse me, I'm taking back my time. I only had 2 minutes. No, I do disagree with the gentleman exactly that. It is always the argument on behalf of the people who are less efficient that efficiency will lead to price increases. I understand there are people who do not believe the market works. I disagree with that. In the first place, there is no danger, in my view, of the milk production business being dominated by 3 or 4 or 5 entities. There will continue to be competition. Secondly, as for preserving the family farms, I would like to try to preserve family farms, but I'd like to preserve family plumbers, family small grocery stores. One of the problems we have here is that we are singling out one occupation, small farming, which is not well served apparently by current economics, and saying we'll preserve you with subsidies and with extra consumer funds and not anyone else. As far as the 6 states are concerned, yes, I know all 6 states have voted for that. I have seen times in my life when states have voted incorrectly. I believe, as a representative of one of those states, that in fact the people I represent are poorly served by a mechanism which increases the price because we presume to make the choice for them. If the gentleman would yield, it should pay more. I will yield one more time to the gentleman from Vermont.
I also am concerned about consumer prices. Then the question that you have to ask is, in the last 20 years, at least in my state, the real price that farmers have gotten for milk has declined in real price by 50%. The question, I would ask unanimous consent for 1 more minute.
Is there objection?
Mr. Chairman, are we under the 5-minute rule?
We're under the 5-minute rule, and the gentleman has asked for unanimous consent for 1 additional minute. Is there objection? The gentleman
we're actually over the 5-minute rule right now.
The gentleman from Vermont may proceed for 1 additional minute.
I thank the gentleman. The issue here to think about, if we're concerned about consumers, is why, if the real price that family farmers have received has gone down by 50%, and farmers all over this country are being driven off of the land, why in the supermarkets the prices have gone up?
Let me respond.
Let me have my 1 minute.
No, I will respond. It's my time.
Hold on. I have 1 minute that was yielded to me.
No, it's my time.
Whose time is it?
The gentleman from Massachusetts has the 1 minute.
All right.
I would say to the gentleman that the price paid to the farmer is not the only price. There are processing costs, there are trucking costs, there are costs in having the store, and I do believe, and I know the gentleman is much more critical of the market than I. I would point out to many of my colleagues on the other side that the view of the market he's taking, he's being consistent, is not one they usually take. They're the ones that are making a very blatant exception for this one favored profession. I differ with the gentleman from Vermont about this. I understand that's his view. I do believe the market generally works, but the price paid to the producer is by far the only element. I'll yield my remaining time to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
I'd simply like to point the problem with the gentleman from Vermont's argument is that he intervenes only in support of some of the farmers in this country. Many other farmers are driven out of business by the very action that is being defended on this House floor today.
For what purpose, gentleman from Oregon, rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair Now that the entertainment is over, we ought to be talking about the issue that's before us and the amendment before us. And having survived these dairy wars in the past, I thought it was possible we might get by one more time, but of course that didn't happen. Frankly, I became involved because I believed that this was not the time or the place to debate again the finality of what's going to happen to dairy. It was my understanding that you all in 1996 passed a bill called Freedom to Farm Bill, which ends subsidies. And I thought that was the process that we were going through. But that did not occur. And in an effort to assist the people in the Midwest, I offered a program to merely extend for 6 months the existing issue, all in a manner to keep the peace. Well, obviously, the people in the Midwest are now suggesting that that's not enough. But it was a compromise, and it was attended to by the gentlemen on this side and ladies and gentlemen on that side. We thought it was an agreement. Now, what's wrong with allowing the authorizers and the appropriators another session, since this is late in this one, and since, thank God, I won't be here to have to enlist in this argument again, what's wrong with allowing the next Congress, authorizers and appropriators, to deliberate and debate this issue in depth? I thought I was offering a reasonable amendment. I was congratulated, by the way, from some members on your side and my side of reaching a reasonable agreement. And I'd be glad to yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Just from a personal point of view, one of the concerns I have is even if this amendment fails and we get the 6-month extension, we're merely delaying the inevitable. We've been in touch with the Department of Agriculture. They've been having hearings. They've been receiving public comment. They've proposed 2 options right now. They're ready to move forward in issuing a rule this fall and implementing that rule early next year, just as the Freedom of Farm Bill authorized them to do just 2 short years ago. And let's get on with it right now. We don't want to have another big dairy fight on this House floor.
Reclaiming my time. I understand the gentleman's point. My point is simply this. We have reached an agreement, a compromise, I thought. Now keep it. Vote this amendment down.
Bob,
I yield to the gentleman from New York.
Let me just clarify one thing, because we're trying to have some comedy here. But this gentleman now who is retiring, he's chairman of the Agricultural Committee, has bent over backwards to try to compromise so that we could work this issue out over the next 6 months or so. I won't be here either. But let me tell you what he did. I went out and got 250 signatures in support of ramming through an order on the Secretary of Agriculture to implement 1A. We could have done that. We could have rubbed your noses in it. Bob came to me and said, you shouldn't be doing that. He came to Bob Livingston and said, you shouldn't be doing that. Incidentally, we already had 61 senators. That's more than you even need to force something on the floor over there in support of our position. So we all backed off. We all sat down because of the chairman of the Agricultural Committee and said, all right, if you want a 6-month extension, we'll agree to it. It's part of an agreement that we all made, and that's why we shouldn't even be going through this debate right now. We should have gone perhaps the other way and settled it one time, once and for all. But I, for one, commend the gentleman because he was acting in good faith, and we all went along with him. And I thank the gentleman.
I yield to the gentleman from New York for unanimous consent.
I rise in strong opposition to the amendment and in support of the chairman's enlightened position and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Petrak.
Yes, I just wondered why, when extending for 6 months the Secretary's marketing order determination, you included an extension for 6 months of the New England Dairy Compact, since the two aren't related.
Well, the gentleman has an amendment, which is we'll have plenty of time to discuss that, and I'd be happy to. It was to extend the total program. Compacts were involved. That's the reason. And frankly, it wasn't debated at length. We'll debate the gentleman's amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Maine rise?
Strike the requisite words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment that's been offered. I seek the elimination of this extension as the chairman of the committee, and I commend the chairman of the committee and the ranking member, Mr. Stenholm, for being able to come to some reasonable judgment in terms of how this should continue on for an additional 6 months until the department and the affiliated groups can come to some resolution of this. The extension applies to all the provisions of dairy reform, and it would ensure that Congress will have that time to review and respond to a rule that would not hurt the dairy farmers around the country. I ask my colleagues not to be misled by the extravagant claims of the industrial cartel organized in opposition to the Compact of Dairy Farmers. I think it's important to clarify some points. I think the most important thing that all of us recognize is the importance of small family farms, small dairy farms, not only in terms of economic dollars and cents, but what they provide to communities. Whether it's a participation in a 4-H program, there are 35,000 young people in our state of Maine that are part of those 4-H programs, or whether it's part of Future Farmers of America program. A lot of the agricultural policies that have been established have benefited large agribusinesses and have forced a lot of the small farmers to get into larger businesses. And we want to preserve this heritage and this culture. And the compact and issues that are being dealt with by the department is a compact between the consumer and the farmers because of the importance of both. And I believe today when we're talking about the values and we're talking about culture and passing on from one generation to the next, I think it's very important to maintain at least this glue which holds communities together. And when you're talking about surpluses and the fact that it's felt that maybe in the Northeast they've contributed to that surplus, the facts don't bear that out. In fact, it was the West and Midwest that produced 99.8% of all the surplus purchased this year. It was not the Northeast. And the compact has not increased the cost of government for federal nutrition programs. In fact, WIC and the school nutrition programs have been exempted from increases associated with that compact. The compact doesn't cost the USDA any money, and the Compact Commission contracts with the market administrator and pays for the services provided. So I ask my colleagues to oppose the amendment that's being offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin, which eliminates this extension and would allow for a true debate to continue on. In my first session in the Committee on Agriculture, there was an attempt to basically turn dairy policy on its head, because at that time the chairman of the subcommittee happened to be from the part of Wisconsin that is under discussion today. And what came out of that discussion was that all regions of the country have the same interest. And I would submit to my members here, what's happening in the Northeast is happening in the Southeast, is going to happen in the West and all over because of the same very underlying issues that are impacting in the Northeast. So I ask my colleagues to both oppose this amendment and the additional amendment that's being offered in this session. I would yield back the balance of the time that I have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The debate that we've heard thus far points out fairly clearly the issues that are at stake. There was a lot of discussion regarding the dairy compact. That is not the issue here. The issue here is an extension of all existing dairy legislation under this appropriations bill for 6 more months. It treats everyone equally. It treats the states involved in the compact, it treats the state of California, and it treats Wisconsin all equally. This is merely an extension of the existing law. As Mr. Solomon pointed out, there are 250 members of this House who are on record in support of option 1A. There are 61 senators who are on record in support of option 1A. We believe that we had the votes to win this. We still believe that. But out of deference to the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, he said, let's compromise this. This is not an authorizing bill. This is an appropriations bill. We'll merely extend the law. That's what we propose to do here. Now, fairly clearly, you've seen members of the state of Wisconsin's delegation standing up and doing their level best to protect their farmers as they see it. And the reason is because they believe that option 1A hurts their farmers, that it helps the rest of the country at the expense of their farmers. All the economic analysis shows that Wisconsin farmers are not harmed by this legislation. They just don't do as well as they would under option 1B. The problem with that is option 1B does harm our farmers, the rest of the country's farmers. So what we're asking is that we extend this law further so that the Secretary Glickman can get a better read on what exactly is going out there in the country. The professional people on his staff recommended option 1A. The law that we believe, that the rest of the country believes, would be good for the dairy industry. The political appointees and Secretary Glickman's staff recommended option 1B. I'm sure out of deference to the very distinguished ranking member of the Appropriations Committee who hails from the state of Wisconsin. He's done a very good job in protecting his farmers. But it's very clear the lines are drawn. There's Wisconsin and Minnesota, and then there's the rest of the country. But we aren't even choosing here between the upper Midwest and the rest of the country. We're merely saying, give us the opportunity to let this law extend out over a period of another 6 months from when it's scheduled to finish up, and give us, the members of Congress, an opportunity to work with the Secretary, we hope, to help him to see the light that option 1A is the best direction to travel in. But this treats the compact states, the upper Midwestern states, the state of California, and the rest of the country equally by merely extending the law. So I would urge strong rejection of the gentleman's amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Wisconsin rise.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment basically just asks this Congress to stick to its original deal, the deal that was made here a couple of years ago, and that's why I vigorously rise today to support this amendment. What it does is just restore order to the underlying bill that continues to punish not just the dairy farmers in Wisconsin, but a lot of them in the Midwest. If we put the situation in perspective, we're working under what I think most people will agree is an outdated dinosaur that we call our dairy policy. It disregards the advance of time, the advance of transportation and technology, and as was referenced here earlier today, in spite of all the talk about the global economy and competing in the rest of the world, we continue to want to put up artificial barriers within our country. We've spent 60 years rewarding dairy farmers with higher prices based on the distance that the cows are located from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. As a result, just some farmers, and it's been pointed out that they are in Eau Claire, but that's how the original dairy policy is based, in Wisconsin, on the distance from Eau Claire. So the farmers who live there and work in America's dairyland have struggled while dairy producers elsewhere have thrived. That wasn't punishment enough. 2 years ago, Congress made the deal, gave the freedom to farm to farmers who produce commodities other than dairy, giving those producers new opportunities. Meanwhile, they delayed the freedom to farm and reform for dairy farmers until April of 1999. If that wasn't punishment enough, the Congress in the same bill created the Northeast Dairy Compact, the subject of some of the debate today. What happened as a result? It cost taxpayers money. We produced surplus milk at twice the rate of the rest of the nation. It cost consumers money in the grocery store, raising the price of milk in that area. And it gives unfair leverage to farmers in the Northeast at the expense of the Midwest. It further divides the country. It pits region against region, farmer against farmer, and what we're trying to do here is to have a level playing field that we ask for in other countries. We're asking for that in our country. Today we have before us, as was pointed out, this is an appropriations bill. It's supposed to be absent of legislative language. Now it would further delay the implementation of the what has been called for 2 years ago, reform in the dairy pricing policy. It would further extend the harmful Northeast Dairy Compact. Now Congress wants to tell Midwest farmers to wait longer for freedom. We have wandered for 60 years under a policy that still relates to the distance cows are located from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. We don't want to wait any longer. And speaking of agreements, this bill is a giant leap backwards. It's a return to the Stone Age of dairy policy. Congress 2 years ago put in place that would reform dairy prices, and that was the deal by April of '99. It may not be perfect, but it was a deal. And now, today, we want to turn it back on our deal. I think that is an outrage. Everybody in this House who talks about the free market system ought to be outraged. Everybody in the House who champions less government interference ought to be outraged. And everybody who praises less government spending also ought to be outraged. I urge my colleagues to join, to support Congressman Obey, to support this amendment that is before us, to reject the backdoor legislative tricks and support the fairness in dairy price reform. I know we'll have a further amendment from Congressman Petri, Congressman Peterson, but I think this amendment is one that will serve us well, that will stick to the original deal that we had to change and really reform the dairy policy, and yet let the USDA do it by April of 1999. We said, let USDA make the decision. Let's let them make the decision on the schedule that was originally intended. I support and ask for your support for this amendment. I yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
I'd like to ask my friend a question. You represent the 8th District in the northeastern part of Wisconsin. As you're traveling around your district, meeting with family farmers, dairy farmers in your area, are you hearing from them that they're looking for any special handout, any special privilege as producers of dairy products compared to the rest of the nation?
Our farmers aren't looking for a special deal. They're concerned about dairy farmers all across the country. The problem is we don't want to have artificial barriers, more compacts created all across the country. We need this amendment to move on with the process of dairy reform.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin rise?
Strike the requisite number of words.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to take this debate from where it is with a bunch of people out here in ties and suits and bring this discussion back home to what it really means back in Wisconsin. My first job, I was on a farm. It was on a dairy farm. I used to get to that farm at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was a teenager at the time, and by the time I got to that dairy farm, the farmer had already milked the cows and was headed into breakfast. Dairy farmers are hardworking individuals in this country. My wife's family, dairy cows, and I'd like the authors of this amendment to hear these words because they're very real. There are no cows on that farm where my first job was. My wife's family, dairy farmers for years, for generations. There are no cows on that dairy farm anymore. And there's a good reason that the dairy farmers in Wisconsin are going out of business. It's the advantage, it's the unfair advantage that's being given people around this country because people out here in this Congress wearing suits are taking away the opportunity for our people to compete on a level playing field. Where are all the free traders? Where are all the people that say we should have a fair marketplace to produce our products and to market our products? Where are all those people in this debate? And then I hear we're protecting the Wisconsin farmers. Come on. We're not protecting the Wisconsin farmers. We're asking that those farmers be given a fair shake across this country, and they're not being given that shake right now. I personally think it's a tad unfair when the government steps into the picture and credits $3 per hundredweight in one part of the country and then goes to Wisconsin and says if you happen to live close to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, you're not eligible for that $3 per hundredweight. What happened to all of those people that I hear on the floor of this House of Representatives regularly saying we want a fair, level playing field in the world marketplace? What about the United States of America? Why don't we get a fair, level playing field here for our dairy farmers? And then I hear, well, we ought to just extend this thing for 6 months. Shoot, I'm beginning to think we're treating this like the notch problem And every time I bring up the notch victim problem in this country, everybody laughs and says it's going to go away. Well, that problem isn't going to go away either, and those people are being mistreated too. But the point is, we're now starting to treat the dairy issue in the same way we're treating the notch problem. If you wait long enough, I'm convinced there are people in this Congress that believe our dairy farmers in the Midwest are all going to be out of business. And shoot, when you think about it, if you've got a $3 per hundredweight advantage in one part of the country, it's likely to put them out of business. I think they believe if they wait long enough and we stall this issue off far enough, that it's going to put enough farmers out of business that we will no longer have to deal with the problem. I think it's time Congress gets out of the way. And I think it's time we return to a competitive atmosphere so the dairy farmers in this country can compete not only with each other, but can compete in the world markets. The government can't step into these pictures and control the price of these products around the country, giving unfair advantages to certain parts of the country if we wish to restore this. I just conclude my remarks by saying the concept of pricing a product based on how far you happen to have your herd of cows located from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, is a situation that I have yet to hear anyone in this city reasonably explain to me why you would come up with that kind of. I support the OB amendment. It's time we make a decision and create a level playing field in this country for our dairy farmers, and it's something that should be done sooner rather than later. The idea is not, the right idea is not to stall off the decision. With that, I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Purpose, gentleman from Massachusetts, rise.
To strike the requisite number.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would first like to yield to my friend from Pennsylvania for a unanimous consent request.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in strong opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin and ask permission to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you for a recognition. I just want to say here that there's no one in this room, whether you're on one side or the other side of this issue, who can claim that the family dairy farms in their part of the country are somehow prospering under the present system of milk marketing orders that we're using. Not if you happen to live in upper New York State, where the gentleman who chairs the Rules Committee comes from. Not if you happen to live in Wisconsin, where the ranking member comes from. Not if you happen to be the chairman of the Appropriations Committee coming from Louisiana, or the gentleman from Vermont in an exporter state, or from myself in an importer state in Minnesota, or Massachusetts, excuse me. In any case, in the Agriculture Authorization Bill in 1997, we authorized a limited set of changes. And after looking at a number of different options, the Secretary of Agriculture has come up with two favored options. Two options, really, 1A and 1B. Under 1A, which is the more moderate of these, the small number of changes, nearly the status quo, and 1B, which is a pretty radical change, at least on the part of, as viewed by farmers, as viewed by farmer cooperatives all over the country. Now, more than a majority of the members of both the House and the Senate, more than a majority of both parties in both branches have written to the Secretary of Agriculture asking him to choose option 1A. There is no question from all parts of this country, except, by the way, from the area within a couple of hundred miles from Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which somehow is the center of the universe as far as milk is concerned. From other parts of the country, that's where that majority come from states all over this country. And they do that because they believe that it will slow, at least slow, if not prevent, because I don't think it'll prevent, the move to milk monopolies. They believe that it protects the capacity to have a consumer access to a fresh and local supply of milk. They believe that that option 1B would accelerate the loss of family dairy farms in places all over the country, except for those within a short distance of Eau Claire. So it's no wonder why the members from Wisconsin are getting up, given that that option 1B clearly changes the playing field. Who's to know in this arcane system whether we've got a level playing field or not? It may be slightly tilted, but this amendment, as it has been offered by the gentleman from Wisconsin, would tilt that whole system very heavily in the direction of of accelerating the loss of family dairy farms in other parts of the country.
The gentleman yield on that point?
I will yield when I finish my statement, because I have the time, and if we can get additional time, I'll be happy to yield. And because the majority believes that it's unfair to then impose a system which clearly then has relative beneficial effects for one portion of the country at the expense of every other portion of the country. And so this carefully crafted proposal to extend by 6 months so that the appropriators and the authorizers can see exactly what it is that is put forward as a milk marketing system by the Secretary of Agriculture, and so they can respond within the fiscal year that goes into effect. That is what this extension is about. I think the chairman of the Agriculture Committee from Oregon said it quite well, that is what this is about, making certain that the appropriators and the authorizers for all of these issues can look at it within that fiscal year that we would be in. And so I certainly hope that the amendment will not be adopted, and I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
I would just like to point out one thing. You indicated that what we were trying to do is to tilt the system in favor of our region of the country. I would point out the law requires farmers in your region of the country to be paid several dollars per 100 pounds of milk more than ours. The option favored by the Secretary simply eliminates 25% or less of that unfair advantage.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
There's been a great deal of talk this afternoon about free markets. And there's been a great deal of talk about one region over another region having a benefit. Now, that certainly is a discussion that we need to have. I think the House floor at this point is not the place to discuss whether the Northeast Dairy Compact has an advantage over Wisconsin or the Midwest dairy farmers. We're going to disagree on that. I strongly urge a no vote on this amendment. This can be taken up. We can extend it for 6 months. It's a discussion that we need to have. We shouldn't be discussing ending a program that is unfair to one part of the country and then transfer that problem to another part of the country. And that's going to be the result of this vote if it passes. I'd like to take this to a slightly different perspective. This country was founded on 4 things, and that's why we're very successful. Democracy, which is what we see here. Character, which for the most part is what we see here. An abundance of natural resources and an endless frontier. Well, our endless frontier is virtually gone. Our open space is becoming gobbled up by a lot of things, including development. Our natural resources are diminishing quickly. And so what we have left to keep this country going, to keep the prosperity and the quality of life that people want for generations to come, is our ability to discuss in an intellectual fashion how we manage what we have left for future generations. Now, the idea of a free market is what this country is founded upon for the most part. General Motors prospers, Westinghouse prospers, industry prospers, but agriculture is different in some ways. General Motors can still work if it rains. Westinghouse can still work if there's a drought. If there's a severe drought in certain parts of the country, they prosper, agriculture suffers and sometimes becomes eliminated. So unless we understand the mechanism of agriculture, and I know the gentleman from Massachusetts may not be here, he talked about a free market system. A free market system is fine if we had an endless frontier, because you'd have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of acres in excess. But what we have is thousands and thousands and thousands of acres being developed every single year. Millions of acres are lost from agriculture to development in one form or another. So the idea that this country must continue to manage, yes, and the Congress needs to be engaged in that process about how we can make it fair across the board. I think a 6-month extension is the right thing to do. I think Wisconsin and the Northeast Dairy Compact, the people in California, need to continue to debate and discuss over that period of time what they can do to ensure that the family farm, which is another issue at discussion here, and the family farm is different than the corporate farm by a long shot. The corporate farm turns farmers into employees. It doesn't take farmers and continue allowing them to be farmers. It turns them into employees, and we can see that in the poultry industry. A poultry grower, for the most part in this country, is not a farmer. He or she is an employee. Now, we want to reverse that if we can, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen in the dairy industry. One last comment, and this is a complicated issue. People are talking about let the prices take care of it, let free market take care of it. The price of a bushel of corn today is the same as it was, given the season, 40 years ago. The price of a bushel of corn that the farmer grows to feed his cow is the same as it was 40 years ago. The price of a combine that harvests that corn 40 years ago was about $25,000. Today, it's well in excess of $100,000, and it's closing in on $200,000. So the small family farm is being squeezed, and the gentleman from Wisconsin talking about that is correct. The Wisconsin farmers are having a difficult time, but so are the farmers in Maryland and New York and Massachusetts and all over this country. We have to stop arguing bitterly with each other and make sure that we understand that the foundation upon the food source of this country is not corporate agriculture that will get out of it as soon as the profits are gone, but those who love the culture, those who love farming, and that's the family farm. And so I would urge a no vote on the amendment, with all due respect to the people from the Midwest and Wisconsin, and let's get together as soon as we can this summer, those who represent the small family farms from all across this country, and discuss how we can solve this problem.
What purpose, gentleman from Vermont, rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to pick up on some of the points Mr. Gilchrist made, because in truth, this is a very sad debate. I will not forget several years ago when farm families from Wisconsin and Minnesota came to my office. They were here for some national meeting, and they knew that I was concerned about the preservation of the family farm. I will not forget the women farmers weeping in my office as they fought desperately to keep their farms going in Wisconsin and Minnesota. The family farmers in Wisconsin and Minnesota are being hurt. That is true. But I want you to understand that the farmers in Vermont are also being driven off the land. Some of the best people in our state who have worked year after year. They love the land. They want to produce a good, healthy product. They want their kids on the land. They are also being driven off the land. And it's in a sad state of affairs that we have to fight against each other. We should be working together. Let me finish, and I'll yield your time. Now, when we talk about the issue of preserving the family farm, as Mr. Gilchrist pointed out, this is an issue of food security. If anyone believes that it is a good thing for this country that thousands of farmers in Wisconsin, in Vermont, and all over this country who produce what we eat get driven off of the land, and that we're reduced to dependency on imports from abroad, or we're reduced to being dependent on a handful of large corporations to charge us any price they want. If people think that is a good idea, they are dead wrong. It is not a good idea. And as Mr. Gilchrist pointed out, preserving the family farm is not just about food. It's protecting our environment. Do we really want to see our open space in rural America converted into malls and to parking lots? I don't think so. It's important about preserving our rural economy and our way of life. The free market does some things very well, but it does not do everything very well. And I think there should be a commitment to preserving the family farm all over this country. As Mr. Solomon has pointed out, and others have pointed out, there is a letter that has been circulated that has over 250 members of the House in support of that. Let me just briefly quote some of the sections from that letter relevant to this debate. And I quote from the letter. Option 1B would further reduce the price of milk received by farmers in almost all regions of the country thereby reducing local supplies of fresh, fluid milk and increasing costs for consumers. And I continue, quote, according to USDA's own analysis, option 1B would reduce dairy farmer income, thereby accelerating the already disturbing trend of American dairy farms being forced out of business. Many of the farms affected will be small family farms. End of quote. The point that we're making here is that, as Mr. Gilchrist indicated, we need to come together to preserve dairy farms in the Northeast, in the Midwest, and in the West Coast. And one of the things that we have done in New England that people throughout the country are beginning to look at is the concept of the Dairy Compact. Now, if some people think that we're going to be able to preserve family farms who are struggling so hard to exist through the market economy when we can import cheap milk from Mexico or New Zealand, I beg to differ. I think it is appropriate to say that in our democratic society, for those of us who believe in dairy farming, in family farming, that it is appropriate for the government to intervene with the support of the people. And I would reiterate that in New England, 6 states have come together, 6 state legislatures have come together, Democrat, Republican, Independent in Maine, 6 governors with different philosophical leanings have come together. This idea is spreading around the country. I would hope perhaps that the Midwest might think of the idea of a concept. I think if it does, in fact, end up costing a consumer a few cents more on a gallon, consumers all over this country know how important it is to preserve the family farm. And I would love to work with my friend from Wisconsin in protecting family farms in that region of the country as well.
If the gentleman would yield, philosophically, I do not disagree with a single thing that the gentleman has said. I would simply make the point that despite his best intentions in mind, we are now operating under a set of laws which, in essence, as far as trade is concerned, is a pretty good deal for grain farmers, but is a disaster for dairy farmers because Canada hasn't been required to live under the same rules that we're required to live under. And so we've been told, oh, sorry, boys, you're on your own. It just seems to me that if we, in fact, are going to be abandoning dairy farmers to the marketplace, then that marketplace, I ask for 1 additional minute.
Is there objection? Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Then it seems to me that that market ought to at least be a real market. Despite everything that's been said here today, no one can tell me yet why it is fair, why it is in the tradition of equal treatment under the law, for the law to require farmers in one section of the country, in Florida, for instance, to pay farmers $2 more or $3 more per 100 pounds of
Reclaiming
milk
my time.
than they get in our region.
Reclaiming my time.
That is just not fair.
There are 250 signers to a letter in support of 1A. There are 60 members of the Senate in support of the same concept. I would urge a no vote on the OB amendment.
For what purpose, gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, it's been said that if you appreciate law or good sausage, you should watch neither being made. And today, maybe we ought to add cheese to that description, because this is really kind of an ugly display of region against region. You know, several years ago, we all cheered when the Berlin Wall came down, and then not too long after that, the flag over the Kremlin came down for the last time. And when it did, one of the business newspapers ran an editorial. I thought it was the Wall Street Journal, but it was not. But they ran an editorial, and the headline said, "Markets are more powerful than armies." If you look at the Soviet experiment for over 70 years, what they tried to do was to hold back markets. And what they found is you can't do it. It won't work. And it's true of milk, it's true of our commodities. You know, the gentleman from Maryland, I agreed with much of what he said, but let's just examine. He said, you know, what the dairy farmers and what the farmers in his area or the farmers around the country today, what they're paying for a combine is enormously different from what they were paying 20 years ago. And what they receive for their commodities, whether it's corn or soybeans or wheat or milk or whatever they produce, is different today than it was 20 years ago. In many respects, farming is a tougher business today than it's ever been. And if you talk to our farmers, and I have as well, they'll tell you that. But what they'll also tell you is that the price of corn is the same whether you grow that corn in Iowa or Minnesota or Vermont or anywhere else. We don't have different prices for corn. We don't have different prices for soybeans. It's the same whether you grow it in one area of the country or another. The entire milk marketing order system is Byzantine. It is anti-market. It may have made some sense back in 1935, but it makes no sense today. In the day of the interstate transportation network, in the day of advanced refrigeration so that the milk can be produced on a farm in Minnesota or Wisconsin one day and literally be at a bottling plant here in Washington, D.C. the next, the whole idea of this one region against the other is anti-American. One of the reasons the colonists came together and organized this country is so that we wouldn't have states setting up barriers against other states. The idea of a dairy compact is un-American. And it isn't really just about dairy. It's whether we really care about free trade. We're going to probably have another debate. We'll have several debates here in the next several months about free trade and opening up markets, whether it's in Asia or the European Union.
Would my
many
friend
of us
yield?
want to have, when I finish, many of us want to have fast track so that we can negotiate more trade agreements with our trading partners. Wouldn't it be great if we had fast track between Minnesota and Vermont so that dairy products could move back and forth across state borders? I mean, this whole concept is crazy. And let me just finish with this. For people to stand on the House floor with a straight face and say that we must defend to the end this dairy policy, which incidentally has cost us 152,000 dairy farmers over the last 10 years. The system, let me say that again, the system we have today that many of you are up on the floor of the House today defending has cost us 152,000 dairy farmers. It is an abysmal failure. It is Byzantine. It is anti-American. It is what the colonies came together to fight against, and it should be stopped. And one of the reasons we're so aggressive today in fighting the extension is because we have fought it so long. This fight has been going on for 60 years, and now they're saying all we want is another 6-month extension. We fear, and I think we have reason to fear, that then there will be another 6-month extension.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Vermont.
I appreciate the differences that we have on the Northeast Dairy Compact, but it's really not appropriate to call it un-American. In fact, it is the essence of what America is about. 6 states at the grassroots level, people came together and they went to their legislatures and they went to their governors and they came forward to do what they thought was best for the people in their own state. So I would appreciate, I understand your difference, but don't really refer to it as un-American. It's democracy at work.
Reclaiming my time. The Commerce Clause of the Constitution. In fact, we ought to have this debate within the Judiciary Committee.